Hey guys, tonight, we're sneaking past the golden gates of the Forbidden City barefoot on cold stone. The moonlight painting silver outlines on tile roofs, and the air thick with the scent of osmanthus. You can almost hear the whisper of silk robes brushing against the ground, as if a procession of ghosts is still pacing to and fro, endlessly searching for the perfect bedtime tea. Somewhere inside, an emperor is adjusting his jade pillow, grumbling about the draft, while eunuchs fuss over whether the tea should be steeped for 7 seconds or 8. Yes, welcome to the royal sleep schedule, so precise it makes your smartwatch look like a sundial. And if you think this is going to be your typical story, full of action, drama, and resolution, oh no, friend. This is about imperial bedtime rituals, obsessive leaf counting, and whether chrysanthemum petals should float clockwise or counterclockwise in a cup. You probably won't survive this level of boredom with your eyes open. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know what country and time are you listening from. Right now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the hushed corridors of the palace, past halls where emperors once conducted the most solemn of ceremonies, like picking out pajamas. Some historians argue about whether the Qing dynasty's sleeve-length decree was ever actually enforced, but there's a clear record of silk being chosen not for fashion, but for its low crinkle factor during late-night turning. One emperor even commissioned a robe sewn entirely from spider silk, delicate, breathable, and apparently terrifyingly flammable. And what of the pillows? These were not your average cloud-like affairs. Most emperors preferred ceramic or carved jade, as if spinal alignment was more crucial than REM cycles. Supposedly, jade pillows kept the head cool and the dreams pure. You imagine resting your head on a polished rock shaped like a goose and wondering how many chiropractor scrolls followed that fashion trend. The emperor's bedroom, if one can call a 200-square-meter hall, a room, was a theater of serenity. Above, painted phoenixes soared among clouds. Below, a brazier quietly radiated the scent of dried citrus peel and aged sandalwood. In one corner, a tea table stood solemnly flanked by 2 attendants with eyebrows permanently raised in reverence. Their only job to pour and present tea, silently, of course. Even the teacups were shaped to avoid sloshing noises. You might expect these powerful rulers to enjoy strong brews of ginseng or pu'er, but no. For sleep, the teas were delicate floral, almost annoyingly subtle. Chrysanthemum, lotus seed, bamboo leaf, and sometimes even boiled pear blossom water. It was said the right tea could induce dream states vivid enough to advise state policy. One emperor allegedly dreamt of a white crane delivering tax reforms. Historians still argue whether he was sleep-talking or just sleep-delegating. And this wasn't casual sipping. Oh no. The imperial bedtime tea ritual was more choreographed than a ballet. First, the water had to be drawn from a spring, ideally one that had seen moonlight but not sunlight in the last 24 hours. Then it was boiled in a kettle with silver lining to remove bitterness. The leaves were measured by weight, not volume, and always rinsed first once for purity, twice if mercury was in retrograde. Some scrolls suggest attendants would even taste test the water first, just to confirm its neutrality, because nothing ruins sleep like judgmental pH levels. At the heart of all this was an oddly modern worry-sleep quality. Emperors had wars to plan, and concubines to ignore. Rest was vital. There are records from the Han dynasty discussing dream disturbances from subpar infusion, which might be the earliest written example of, it's not you, it's your tea. But of course not every emperor followed the rulebook. Emperor Zhao of Han, for instance, was rumored to prefer wine over tea before bed, claiming that only in wine does the dragon finally sleep. He also reportedly issued decrees in his dreams and demanded they be recorded upon waking. The resulting scrolls were full of phrases like "decree of the floating duck" and "3 bags of sky." Scholars remain baffled. You trail behind one particularly anxious servant trying to perfect the tea tray presentation. Should the cup be placed to the emperor's left for easy reach, or right to signify humility? These were the kinds of debates that filled the marble halls long after the war councils had ended. Eventually, the emperor takes his seat. A hush settles. The tea is poured, steam rising in slow spirals. He inhales, then sips, then closes his eyes, not because the tea is perfect, but because that's his cue to exit consciousness. You feel yourself mirroring the moment, eyes heavier, the scent of ancient herbs wrapping around your senses like fog on a lake. In a world ruled by mandate of heaven, sleep was no afterthought. It was a ritual, a science, an art, and sometimes a really slow form of passive-aggressive rebellion, especially when the tea wasn't warm enough. You drift forward in time, like a tea leaf unfurling in warm water still inside the Forbidden City, but now it's the 8th century during the Tang dynasty. The palace looks the same in the soft glow of evening lanterns, just a few more jade sculptures scattered about, and a lot more poetry carved into random walls. Tonight you follow Emperor Xuanzong, a ruler so enamored with dreams that he once tried to legislate better sleep across the empire. It all started as these things often do with a bad night's sleep. One evening, after tossing and turning on his too firm lacquered bed, Xuanzong declared that the empire's dreams were suffering. Naturally, the solution wasn't better mattresses, but better tea. The emperor, seeking inspiration, asked his court physicians to develop a blend that would anchor the soul yet release the spirit. The resulting concoction included chrysanthemum petals, crushed honeysuckle, and a dubious spoonful of fermented persimmon bark. Upon drinking it, Xuanzong claimed he dreamt of flying pigs, although some scrolls suggest he might have just hallucinated due to an accidental overdose of mulberry pollen. Historians still argue whether this dream actually led to the creation of the Imperial Sleep Registry, a document where advisors were required to record their nightly dreams in hopes of interpreting omens from the emperor's subconscious. One poor minister reportedly dreamt of dumplings chasing him down a hallway and was reassigned to fish-counting duties by sunrise. The real mystery, though, lies in how these teas were chosen. Xuanzong established a nocturnal tasting court, which met weekly to sample and rate new sleepy time blends. These meetings were held in the Whispering Pavilion, a place so silent that the sound of steam hissing from a kettle could reportedly be heard from across the courtyard. That or the courtiers were just very good at being dramatic. Here's where it gets weird. Instead of relying solely on herbalists, the emperor invited poets, painters, and even a few fortune-tellers to judge the teas. One painter insisted that a tea's quality could be seen in the shape of its steam spiral. A poet described one blend as tasting like the echo of forgotten bamboo. And the fortune-teller, she simply nodded, closed her eyes, and said, "Yes, this one whispers." You watch from behind a lattice screen as the emperor holds court. He raises a delicate porcelain cup shaped like a peach blossom. The infusion inside shimmers with gold flakes, real ones, of course. Because nothing says I'm ready to relax like ingesting precious metals. He sips slowly, exhales once, and then smiles. That night, it's said he dreamed of clouds shaped like mandarins. The next day, he banned all citrus imports. Coincidence scholars debate it to this day, but the emperor's obsession didn't stop at taste. He commissioned tea gardens just for bedtime, blends no caffeine allowed. These gardens were tended by monks trained in both horticulture and lullabies. They spoke to the plants, hummed to the soil, and occasionally dozed off mid-weeding. Some even claimed the plants whispered back. You don't believe them, but also you kind of want to. Meanwhile, the rest of the empire tried to keep up. Nobles began hosting sleep ceremonies mimicking the emperor's rituals with varying degrees of success. One particularly ambitious noble attempted to serve tea while suspended upside down from a silken hammock, claiming the blood flow improved dream clarity. He later sued his pillow maker for spiritual misalignment. And what about the common folk? Well, they improvised. Without access to silver kettles or moon-exposed spring water, they brewed bedtime teas using rice husk, dried orange peel, and anything mildly fragrant. Some simply warmed old wine and called it a night. One village developed a tradition of whispering secrets into their tea before drinking it, believing the silence would carry their worries away. Oddly sweet when you think about it. You stroll through the dream archives, now silent shelves, holding scrolls upon scrolls of recorded visions. They're full of bizarre images, flying turtles, weeping mountains, tea leaves that sing lullabies. Some of them are clearly dreams. Others, maybe just side effects of too much licorice root. Still, you can't help but feel a little charmed. Imagine an empire where sleep was treated with such importance, where your dreams could change your career path or accidentally start a fashion trend. You pause at a scroll titled Night of the Floating Elephants and wonder if this was the emperor's dream, or his servant's prank gone terribly right. The truth is, for all their power, these emperors were just tired people trying to get some rest like you right now. They had the weight of nations on their shoulders, yet still fretted over the temperature of their teacups. Somehow that makes them feel oddly human. So you keep walking, the scent of chrysanthemum and honeysuckle wafting through the corridors. You pass a small servant girl arranging teacups, muttering to herself about clockwise versus counterclockwise leaf spins. Somewhere deep in the palace, a bell rings, soft low like a heartbeat slowing down. And for a moment, the whole world seems to exhale. You drift deeper into the palace where the halls begin to blur in the dim glow of oil lamps and moonlight. Here in the quieter corners of the court, rules ruled everything, especially the rules about tea. Not just who could drink what, but when, how, why, and perhaps most bewildering of all, where one should look while sipping. You quickly realize that in imperial China, tea wasn't merely a beverage. It was a hierarchy in a cup. Tonight's story swirls around a strange truth. Your bedtime tea depended entirely on your rank. If you were the emperor, you sipped from porcelain so delicate it trembled if you looked at it wrong. If you were a junior scribe, you were lucky to get leftover infusion from yesterday's leaves. And if you were a stable boy, your tea may have just been boiled water that once touched a leaf by accident. The rules, of course, were endless. In some dynasties, only members of the royal household could drink lotus seed tea after sundown. Mulberry bark infusion was reserved for scholars with passing scores in imperial exams. One legendary rulebook, a scroll so long it required its own storage room, outlined 47 sleep protocols, including the correct alignment of the tea tray to one's birth constellation. Historians still argue whether this document was sincere or just the result of one over-caffeinated bureaucrat trying to impress his boss. The story goes that during the Song dynasty, an ambitious official attempted to climb the ranks by perfecting the court's tea protocol. He invented the 5-sip method, a rigid performance in which each sip represented a virtue: stillness, loyalty, insight, silence, and oddly proper accounting. If the emperor frowned during any sip, the brewer could be reassigned to latrine duty, or worse, promoted to tax form oversight. You follow the trail of these rituals like a somnambulist through history. In one wing of the palace, an entire tea library contains scrolls dedicated solely to infusion timing. Should the tea be steeped for 53 seconds or 55? Should the water be cooled on silver trays or agitated gently by waving a feather over it? A famous tea master once claimed that humming softly in the room during steeping improved the tea's emotional clarity. This was never proven but became court policy for a solid decade. Of course, every rule had its rebels. One notorious concubine, Lady Plum, was caught brewing sleep tea with black tea leaves instead of the recommended chrysanthemum blend. Her defense, "I prefer my dreams to have plot twists." Rather than punishing her, the emperor reportedly laughed so hard he issued a pardon and declared her blend the official tea of mild defiance. Then there were the poor palace guards who had the most tragic bedtime tea of all none. Their job was to stay awake through the night, patrolling the gardens and courtyards, listening to the eerie creaks of the old palace bones. But even they found ways to bend the rules. Some brewed secret teas from fallen osmanthus petals or roasted barley tucked into their sleeves. One guard became so skilled at foraging palace herbs that he was eventually reassigned as an imperial herb scout. His memoir, Leaves of Duty, is still considered a bedtime favorite by insomniac librarians. You find yourself now standing before the Chamber of Infusions, a room once used solely for preparing ranked teas. It has 12 stoves each at a slightly different height to control temperature. Above each hangs a painted scroll depicting an animal spirit representing the tea's ideal dream effect: rabbit for serenity, turtle for longevity, crane for lucid dreaming, and the infamous bat used in one rare blend said to trigger prophetic visions, or indigestion, possibly both. As you wander further, you spot two young pages whispering over a tray. They're arguing whether it's appropriate to serve plum blossom tea during a waning moon. One insists it's unlucky. The other shrugs and says, "Then we just serve half a cup." You nod in silent approval. Tea logic. It's not all pettiness and powdered herbs, though. These rituals, absurd as they sound, reflected a genuine cultural reverence for harmony, rest, and the idea that dreams were sacred terrain. Sleep was a portal, a council chamber, a place to meet ancestors, and maybe get unsolicited advice about court politics. And so you picture the emperor again, sitting quietly as an attendant recites his dream tea horoscope. Tonight, Your Majesty will sip golden needle tea. It is ideal for calming inner dragons and enhancing gentle snoring. The emperor yawns, approves, takes one sip. Dreams of floating on a river made of silk. You almost miss the detail on the table, the tea napkins embroidered with the phrase, "What you dream, you govern." A bit dramatic, maybe. But in a palace where bedtime teas could decide who got promoted or demoted, it was more than just embroidery, it was policy. And as you curl into your own mental palace, you start to feel the slow warmth of the tea you've imagined. The delicate aroma of chrysanthemum and pear, a touch of roasted rice, maybe a hint of star anise. You don't need to follow all the rituals. You just need to let the night seep in. Let the rules fade like steam on lacquered wood. Let the jokes drift. Let the absurdity of it all cradle you like a jade pillow on a summer breeze. You shuffle onward past the outer courts and shadowed pagodas until you reach a garden path that smells like damp earth pine resin and something faintly medicinal. A place known to very few and remembered by even fewer, the imperial herb grove. This is where your story tonight takes a rather adventurous turn, not because of drama, but because of silk robes in the wilderness. Yes, welcome to the world of midnight herb hunts, where the emperor's servants scoured the countryside for leaves that made you snore like a poet with deadlines. The ritual began on the first full moon of spring. The emperor, needing fresh sleepy time blends, would issue a quiet decree, select servants herbalists, and sometimes the occasional squirrel-obsessed monk were to set out and gather the rarest, most drowsy-inducing herbs from secret mountain groves. Naturally, they wore formal robes. Naturally, these robes were white. Naturally, tigers also lived in those mountains. Historians still argue whether the fashion choice was symbolic or just an extremely poor understanding of camouflage. One particularly famous hunt happened during the reign of Emperor Renzong of Song. Obsessed with improving his dream clarity, he claimed dreams gave him stock tips or something like it. He commissioned a special team of 11 gatherers. Their mission: locate the legendary herb known as Dragon's Yawn, said to bloom only between midnight and 2 a.m. in damp fog beneath the canopy of a single haunted pine. Most scholars agree that Dragon's Yawn likely never existed, but the search became a seasonal event. For weeks, the palace buzzed with rumors someone had seen the glow of its flower, someone else had sneezed near it, and slept for 36 hours. One servant allegedly found it, brewed it, and promptly vanished. In reality, he may have just overslept in a haystack. Still, his legend lives on in folk songs sung by bored tea-house musicians. Meanwhile, back in the palace, maps were drawn scribing where certain herbs had been located. Every plant was believed to have its own unique dream property. Cloud moss said to promote dreams of flying. Ghost lavender encouraged memory recall of previous lives, or of last Tuesday. Snail root caused exceptionally slow dreams. One dream reportedly lasted 3 nights. Naturally, the emperors didn't dirty their own hands with the picking. Instead, they relied on these midnight hunters' silhouettes in mist-balancing tea baskets and dodging snakes. Some wore tiny bells around their ankles to warn wildlife. Others preferred stealth, claiming even the plants slept lightly and could be startled into bitterness. You watch as a young herbalist kneels beside a pond, reaching gently for a lily pad covered in morning dew. He's careful not to disturb the frogs. There was a superstition that frog croaks near the herb would cancel the dream magic. This particular belief was likely invented by frogs, but no one had the nerve to disprove it. A rather famous mishap occurred when one overly zealous servant returned with a full basket of sleep leaf, only to discover it was, in fact, a mild laxative. The resulting chaos in the emperor's quarters is not recorded in official texts, but has been immortalized in 1,000 whispered jokes across generations of palace staff. Still, for all the silliness, these hunts had real cultural weight. There was a belief that nature held the key to restful sleep, not just in what you drank, but in the story of how it came to be brewed. The origin of your tea mattered. If your infusion had been gathered under moonlight and filtered through morning fog, then surely it carried some piece of the stars. A sleeping emperor could awaken with ideas for tax reforms, or poetry, sometimes both at once, which tended to confuse everyone. Of course, not all emperors were equally respectful of the process. One short-tempered Ming ruler reportedly demanded his sleepy time tea be made from the rarest herb, no matter the cost. His servants returned with a single crumpled leaf wrapped in golden silk. When asked where they found it, they simply said, "Inspiration." The emperor wept from frustration, then drank it anyway, and later declared war on moss. But for most rulers, the herb hunts were both practical and symbolic, a way of connecting the court to the mountains, the bedchamber to the forest, and sleep to the cycles of earth and air. You might even say they understood, long before science did, the soothing power of ritual of nature and of really overthinking a cup of tea. You continue along the grove's edge, where the plants grow in strange spirals, as if shaped by wind or dreams. A cool breeze brushes your cheek. Somewhere nearby, a nightbird calls soft and hollow. You wonder if this very path was once walked by barefoot servants, clutching silk pouches of fragrant stems, hoping to impress an emperor, and maybe earn a quiet promotion to library duty. And as you picture it all, moonlight on dew, the gentle rustle of leaves, the hush of distant frogs, you feel something loosening inside. A gentle unwinding, like a silk robe falling to the floor. You follow the curling scent of tea steam, now wafting from a stone stairway, descending into the inner courtyard of a monastery, nestled within the palace grounds. It's quiet here, quieter than anywhere else you've wandered tonight. You can almost hear your own thoughts if they weren't already melting into the soft sounds of distant gongs, rustling leaves, and the occasional sleepy yawn of a passing tortoise. This is where things get both more peaceful and, well, slightly ridiculous. Because tonight you're about to witness how monks accidentally invented one of history's most calming brews. It all began, of course, with a mistake. As the story goes, centuries ago, during the Sui dynasty, a monk named Tiansheng was meditating under a flowering tea bush. He had been fasting for 3 days, reciting sutras so slowly that even snails rolled their eyes. When a sudden breeze knocked a few blossoms into his boiling water pot, he didn't notice. He simply poured the water sipped and continued chanting. And then something curious happened. He didn't just feel calmer, he felt clear. The next morning he reported dreams of walking across clouds made of parchment and receiving tea recipes from heavenly deer. Other monks tried the accidental brew and claimed it made them levitate. One monk insisted it caused him to remember the exact number of times he'd blinked in his life. Scholars still argue whether this was spiritual enlightenment or mild pollen-induced hallucination. Regardless, the legend took root, and thus was born what came to be known as still mind tea. It contained tea blossoms, camellia petals, and a wild sprig of sweet flag grass. The ingredients changed depending on the temple, the season, or frankly the mood of whoever was boiling the water. But the purpose remained to calm the body and invite dreams where wisdom whispered. Of course, it wasn't all incense and insight. Some batches went terribly wrong. One abbot accidentally steeped his tea with mushrooms meant for ink dyeing. He spent the night convinced he was a dragonfly and tried to mate with a candle. Another time, a young novice added 5 extra sprigs of cloud herb, which he thought would deepen meditation, but instead caused uncontrollable hiccups that echoed through the prayer hall for hours. Despite these minor setbacks and the occasional existential crisis caused by improperly steeped sage root, the monks continued to refine their craft. They believed that brewing sleep-inducing tea was itself a form of meditation. Water had to be drawn from a basin that hadn't seen sunlight. The pot was to be warmed by moonstone coals, and the person steeping the tea had to be barefoot, humming either a chant or their favorite dumpling recipe. It really depended on the monastery. You step inside the tea house chapel now, where a monk gently brushes the surface of a teacup with a feather, just to check the temperature. No thermometer here, just the ancient test of feels like a sleepy cheek. Another monk is sketching the swirl pattern of the steam into a notebook, muttering something about turbulence equals tension. Meanwhile, a third monk dozes upright mid-sip. This, too, is a form of success. One of the strangest elements of this sleepy tradition was the monks' belief that tea could preserve dreams. They called it memory steeping. Before bed, each monk would whisper the theme of their desired dream into their teacup. Not a whole paragraph, just one word: forgiveness, flight, more tofu. Then they'd drink sleep, and in the morning write whatever they remembered in the dream scrolls. These scrolls were equal parts mystical and mundane. One entry read, "I floated in a lotus pond and became one with the tadpoles." Another, "I reconciled with my brother. He was also a dumpling." And perhaps most relatable, "I dreamed I could sleep." Some modern historians dismiss these as nonsense. Others say they reflect the subconscious bubbling up through ritual. And at least one skeptical scholar pointed out that the monks also used a lot of fermented fig syrup, which might explain the talking dumplings. Still, emperors took notice. Word of the monks' dream-enhancing tea spread through the palace like incense smoke on a lazy afternoon. Soon, sleepy-time teas inspired by the monks' recipes became popular among the elite. A few emperors even invited monks to serve as personal tea advisors, a surprisingly relaxing political appointment, until one monk misquoted a dream and was reassigned to count fish in the royal pond. You glance around the monastery tea house one last time. The cups are empty now. The monks are all either asleep meditating or pretending to do one while actually doing the other. A small sign carved above the doorway reads, "To dream well steep gently." You wonder if they meant the tea or the soul. Outside a bell tolls once. You walk back into the garden, your mind steeped in jasmine-scented haze. And as you move away, you imagine yourself drifting over that same tea bush where the story began, petals falling into a pot, unintentionally rewriting history one sip at a time. Sometimes the path to peaceful sleep is an accident in a kettle. And maybe that's okay. You find yourself gliding back through time past layers of incense smoke and dynastic dreams until the mist of myth thickens like a freshly brewed cup of dark oolong. This is where the story shifts from monks and mistakes to something far older, far weirder. Tonight you finally meet Emperor Shen Nung, the mythical father of Chinese medicine agriculture, and most importantly, tea. According to legend, Shen Nung had a transparent belly, so he could observe the effects of herbs on his organs in real time. If that already sounds made up, buckle in. This same emperor is said to have discovered tea after boiling 72 herbs in a single pot, either in pursuit of the perfect digestive cleanser or because he was spectacularly bored. You're standing with him now, figuratively of course, on a windswept hill in prehistoric China. His beard is majestic. His eyebrows alone could start a dynasty. He's dressed in bark fiber robes, staring deeply into a bubbling cauldron filled with herbs with names like Thunderroot and Laughing Vine. He looks tired, but in that intense, I just invented taxonomy kind of way. The legend goes while resting under a wild tea tree, a breeze blew some leaves into his boiling water. Curious and possibly parched from having consumed 31 different toxic roots that day, Shen Nung took a sip. It was slightly bitter, faintly floral, and unlike anything he'd tasted. Moments later he claimed to feel alert yet calm, balanced, and crucially not dead. Thus, tea was born. Or so the scrolls suggest. Historians still argue whether Shen Nung ever existed, or if he was an amalgamation of several wise but sleep-deprived ancient doctors. Some believe his transparent belly was just poetic metaphor. Others point out that even with regular bellies, humans have always sought remedies that let them both survive the day and actually sleep through the night. What's less up for debate is that tea from this point onward became not just a drink, but a tool, a way to rebalance the body, to calm the hot winds and harmonize inner organs, and eventually to soothe the emperor after a long day of sitting still and being revered. You watch as Shen Nung dips a ladle into the pot. He's added everything now: goji berries, chrysanthemum petals, powdered deer antler, yep, a splash of river stone water, and something he insists is sleep moss. He drinks. He sighs. He does not immediately pass out, which in ancient pharmacology is a resounding success. Inspired by this moment later, emperors tried replicating the 72 herb tea to various degrees of effectiveness. Some versions had only 5 herbs. One particularly ambitious prince insisted on using exactly 72, which caused his kitchen staff to revolt mid-boil. There's a preserved record of this event in the form of a wall carving that simply reads, "Too many leaves. No sleep. Send help." Still, the mystique of Shen Nung endured. His image was painted in countless palaces, always sipping tea, always looking just slightly smug. He was a bedtime hero to generations of emperors who would invoke his name before sipping their evening brews. One emperor reportedly slept with a tiny jade statue of Shen Nung beside his bed. Another hosted an annual transparent stomach banquet, which is not what it sounds like, but still deeply unsettling. There were fringe believers, too, alchemists, who claimed to find the original 72 herb formula in forgotten caves, or dream mediums, who said Shen Nung whispered recipes to them during astral projection naps. One enthusiastic but misguided herbalist even tried brewing tea from tree bark fermented scorpion and hope. The result was banned for audible side effects. Yet even the skeptics had to admit tea worked, even if it wasn't magical. Even if Shen Nung had just been lucky. It soothed digestion. It warmed the chest. It made sleep, that shy creature of the night, come a little closer, curl up a little sooner. You now find yourself in a room dedicated to royal mythic teas. Dozens of shelves hold scrolls, leaves crushed powders, even petrified flower buds in tiny glass globes. There's an almost devotional silence here. You reach for a scroll titled Shen Nung's Final Infusion and read the last line. The tongue calms, the breath slows, and the stars forget to blink. A bedtime poem disguised as a prescription. Of course, not all who drank the mythical blend had mystical dreams. One palace record notes that Emperor Liang of the southern dynasties tried recreating Shen Nung's tea and simply ended up sleep-laughing for 6 hours. His ministers filed a formal complaint. Another time a servant misread the recipe and served a tea that turned the emperor's tongue blue. He considered it a divine sign and refused to drink anything else for a month. You smile at the absurdity of it all, the endless tinkering, the wild mythologies, the transparent bellies and 72 leaves. And yet at its core, there's something deeply relatable here. Because aren't you also looking for that perfect blend, that one cup warm in your hands that makes the day dissolve, that carries you gently into rest? Maybe you don't need 72 herbs. Maybe you just need one that tastes like being left alone. So as Shen Nung fades back into the fog of legend and his cauldron simmers down into silence, you turn away from the myths. The real dream is already brewing somewhere inside you. The scent hits you before the story does sweet grassy, with a suspicious whiff of burnt fennel. You're now in a different corner of the imperial palace, one that history books rarely mention the tasting chambers. Or, as some less reverent palace workers called it, the room of regret. Tonight you witness the sleepy yet perilous art of imperial tea testing, and how one poorly timed burp could end your career. Yes, welcome to the world of royal taste testers, those brave souls whose job was to sip the emperor's bedtime brew first to make sure it wouldn't cause hallucinations, heart palpitations, or spontaneous truth-telling. Because nothing says goodnight like a 2% chance of slipping into a prophetic trance about the Prime Minister's corruption. You tiptoe through the candlelit testing hall, where a dozen tiny tea stations are set up, like exam desks for anxious alchemists. Each tray contains a tiny bowl of tea, a napkin embroidered with the dynasty's symbol, and a scroll with tasting notes like aroma bold, texture whispery, aftertaste existential. Taste testers came from various backgrounds. Herbalists failed poets, one guy who could allegedly smell poison through silk. Their training was rigorous. You had to identify 47 herbs by scent, memorize the effects of drinking too much peony root, and perhaps hardest of all, keep a straight face when sipping something that tasted like damp parchment wrapped around regret. One infamous tester, Xu Wen, became a palace legend after dramatically collapsing mid-taste. Alarms were raised, emergency gongs were banged, and the emperor's tea was ceremoniously dumped into the koi pond. Only later was it discovered that Xu Wen had simply dozed off while standing an involuntary nap brought on by genuine sleepiness. Ironically, it meant the tea worked. He was promoted to Senior Dream Verifier. Still, testing was no joke. Tea recipes changed constantly, depending on the season, the emperor's mood, or an ominous dream about undercooked dumplings. Some blends included odd additions, powdered pearl bamboo ash, or essence of gourd rind aged in rainwater. One particularly eccentric emperor insisted that his tea contain a single drop of dew collected from a lily at exactly 3:17 a.m. The servant responsible missed it by 2 minutes and spent a week cleaning incense burners in the north wing. Then there was the incident of the burp. A young tester named Li Tao, nervous during a presentation of a new tea blend to Emperor Xianzong, accidentally burped after sipping. The room went silent. The emperor squinted. Scholars still argue whether it was a burp of disrespect or just the honest escape of a slightly oversteeped lotus blend. Regardless, Li Tao vanished from court records the next day. Rumors say he was reassigned to the tea garden, where he allegedly found peace among the snails. But not all testers feared doom. Some embraced their roles with flair. They wrote haiku about each sip. They conducted blindfolded tea trials. One bold woman, Madame Zhen, became the first official to recommend skipping tea altogether, one evening declaring, "Tonight silence is more medicinal." The emperor was so intrigued that he wrote a scroll titled The Brewless Brew, which became a short-lived but passionate movement across tea circles. You sit now where they once sat cross-legged on a cushion, holding a delicate cup. The tea is amber clear and strangely comforting. You take a sip. It's warm, then cool. Soft, but a little sharp. Like a dream that almost makes sense. You imagine the tester's notebook beside you, initial impression like floating inside a tangerine. Mouthfeel, whispering into a pillow. Aftertaste, childhood regret, and sage advice. The truth was, taste testers weren't just guards against poison. They were curators of rest. They shaped the emperor's dreams one sip at a time. A calming blend. The ruler might wake feeling generous. A too-bitter brew. You might see tax laws rewritten by lunch. It wasn't just chemistry. It was politics, poetry, even psychology. What does the emperor want to feel before sleep? What fears need soothing? What thoughts should fade? These were the questions asked in silence, in steam, in that tiny moment between inhale and sip. And as the candles flicker lower and your own mind starts to drift, you realize something. All this effort for what? A cup of warm liquid, a moment of peace, a doorway to a softer world. You take another sip. It tastes like rain, like paper, like the pause between two thoughts. You feel your eyelids soften. In some part of the palace, a bell rings to mark the hour of dreaming. And somewhere very far away, perhaps a tester finally nods and whispers, yes, this one whispers. You float now into a part of the forbidden city few ever dared to enter without an invitation wrapped in gold silk, the private quarters of Empress Wu Zetian, the only female emperor in Chinese history, the woman who ruled with scrolls in one hand and serenity in the other. The one who, according to both historians and hopeful romantics, had her own dream chamber built solely for the purpose of better sleep. And yes, it was exactly as extra as it sounds. The dream chamber was located just beyond the Palace of Longevity, behind a jade gate carved with lotus patterns. It was said to be constructed from a rare blend of cypress wood and sandalwood, with walls insulated by silken panels dyed in calming hues. Sunset lavender soft gold, and whatever shade of green was deemed least politically controversial that season. The ceilings were painted with stars, hand-placed according to an astrologer's chart meant to promote ideal REM frequency. Inside, nothing was accidental. A harpist played faint arpeggios in a nearby alcove, slow meandering, designed to lull rather than impress. The scent of crushed orchid and honeysuckle was diffused into the air using heated stones and wet silk fans. Even the lighting was curated with reflective moonstone bowls placed at precise angles to catch moonlight and scatter it like soft pearls across the floor. But the true star of the show, the Empress's personal bedtime tea bar. Because of course, there was one. Here, Empress Wu had assembled an elite squad of herb whisperers, alchemists, and one very sleepy poet named Yun, whose only job was to name each blend after a specific emotion she hoped to feel in her dreams. He once described a tea as a sigh turning into a feather. He was immediately promoted. Wu Zetian didn't simply drink tea, she communed with it. She believed sleep was a form of statecraft, that a mind well rested could spot betrayal before breakfast. Her preferred blend, a complex mixture of white peony, jujube seed, and a pinch of crushed pearl, chosen not just for its calming effect, but because she liked the way it clinked ever so gently in the cup. She had a favorite teacup, too clear crystal, rimmed with gold, engraved with the character for tranquility. It was said she never let anyone else touch it, not even her most trusted attendants. One rumor claimed that if the cup ever chipped, the Empress would cancel all meetings the next day. Sleep was sacred, and sacred things demanded respect. You sit now in the dream chamber, or a memory of it trying not to step on the embroidered rug shaped like a drifting cloud. A servant enters without sound, bows so low you worry they might fold into the furniture, and begins preparing tonight's blend, one designed for deep, forgetful sleep. That meant lotus wild date pit and a drizzle of honey boiled over almond wood. You inhale, you exhale, you can feel your bones settle. And yet the Empress wasn't always chasing forgetfulness. Sometimes she wanted clarity, dreams of strategy of enemies unmasked, of whispered names carried on wind through bamboo forests. On those nights, she drank what her herbalist called sharp petal. It had ginseng green tea and the faintest touch of Sichuan pepper. That blend didn't promote rest, it commanded insight. Historians still debate whether Wu Zetian's dreams ever shaped actual policy. One document never confirmed claims she once dreamt of a palace uprising involving ducks, and the next day outlawed the consumption of duck eggs near court chambers. Another time, she reportedly dreamt of the ocean encroaching into the palace and ordered all moat bridges to be widened by 2 feet. Overreaction, maybe. But sleep dreams under absolute power tend to have big consequences. The Empress's dedication to her tea rituals inspired imitators. Across the empire, noblewomen commissioned their own dream chambers. The wealthiest families imported moonstone-trained harpists and attempted to match the Empress's tea blends, but none ever quite recreated the magic. One overambitious countess filled her sleeping room with lilies, only to discover her cat was allergic and promptly declared the entire plant family treasonous. But perhaps no one took the Empress's sleepy time rituals more seriously than Wu herself. It's said that every night, just before sipping the tea, she whispered a question into the steam. Not out loud, just in thought. What should I know that I haven't seen? Then she would drink, breathe once, and lie down on a pillow stuffed with phoenix feathers and dried mint leaves. And if a dream came, she listened. You wonder as the imagined steam curls around your ears what you would whisper into your cup tonight, what clarity you'd ask for, what memory you'd like, softened what feeling you'd wish to steep a little longer before letting go. The chamber fades as you imagine Wu Zetian turning on her side, the harp fading into stillness, the cup empty beside her. A ruler asleep but never off duty. Her dreams were her empire too, and yours perhaps are not so different. The hallway ahead is brighter now, not from lanterns, but from a soft gleam of light, filtering through thin paper screens painted with mountains, clouds, and tiny green leaves. You've arrived in the wing of the palace where reputations were made, snoring was discouraged, and taste was everything the imperial tasting gallery of Dragonwell tea, also known as Longjing, the sleep-inducing darling of several Chinese emperors. It wasn't always this way. Once upon a dynasty, tea was tea, leaves in water, maybe a flower, maybe a root. But at some point in the Song dynasty, emperors began playing favorites, and Dragonwell, with its flat, jade-colored leaves and subtly roasted aroma, became the crowned king of bedtime infusions. The story goes that an emperor once visited a tea-growing village near Hangzhou and sampled a cup made from freshly plucked leaves near an ancient well. The taste sublime. Grassy, toasty, with a lingering sweetness that felt like a hug from a scholar. He declared the tea sacred, the well imperial, and the village very suddenly an important part of the national bedtime routine. From then on, Longjing tea was hand-picked by virgins wearing silk gloves, not a joke, and the first harvest each spring was reserved exclusively for the emperor's use. The leaves had to be pan-fired by a tea master whose palms had been evaluated for temperature uniformity. One particularly sensitive emperor claimed he could taste the difference between a left-handed roast and a right-handed one. Historians still argue whether he was gifted or just insufferable. You're seated now at one of the lacquered tasting tables inside the gallery. A servant, expressionless in that highly trained, I've seen things, way pours hot water into a porcelain cup, shaped like a half-unfurled lotus. The leaves float, then slowly sink in elegant spirals. You're told not to stir. The leaves must settle themselves. This apparently is the tea's way of demonstrating character. A court poet once described Longjing as tea that dreams of being water. Another courtier said it tastes like a memory you can't quite name. A third simply sighed and said, "Honestly, I just needed to sit down." But Dragonwell wasn't just flavor. It had rules. It had symbolism. The flat shape of the leaves was said to resemble a boat carrying the drinker across the river of sleep. Or perhaps it resembled a dragon's tongue folded for quiet. Or, if you were less poetic and more honest, a very fancy green bean. The imperial sleep doctors adored it. They claimed Longjing soothed the liver, relaxed the fire of the heart, and unwrinkled the spirit. One scroll even suggested it could cure excessive thinking, though that may have been a wish more than a prescription. You sip, and yes, it's pleasant. Not too bold. A little nutty. The kind of drink that doesn't shout its flavor but politely waves from across the room. It's the tea equivalent of an introvert who just reorganized their spice rack and is ready to tell you all about it, if you ask nicely. Of course, no emperor's favorite tea goes unchallenged. Rivals emerged golden monkey tea from the south, snow sprout tea from the highlands. There was even a rogue general who promoted his own sleep thunder blend, later found to contain trace amounts of opium and questionably ground eggplant. But Longjing persisted. Not because it was the strongest or most mysterious, but because it never got in the way. It whispered, and that was enough. Over time, rituals developed around it. Before drinking, the emperor would hold the cup close to his face, inhale 3 times, and recite a short verse. Usually something like, Quiet leaf, quiet heart, quiet world. Then a single sip, a pause, and finally a nod. The palace staff would then exhale because that nod meant it was safe to begin dreaming. Even the palace cats had opinions. One empress's Persian feline reportedly refused to drink water unless it had been infused with leftover longjing. Another cat was rumored to have sneezed so fiercely near the emperor's teacup that he changed the dynasty's standard brewing temperature from 80 tauntudig to 80 dirut, just to be safe. You look around the gallery. The air is thick with the scent of roasted tea leaves and polished wood. Servants tiptoe. Steam rises like soft handwriting from every cup. Somewhere in the rafters a wind chime shivers slightly, as if nodding in approval. There's something deeply comforting here. The knowledge that centuries of rulers, despite their power, their paranoia, their astronomically complicated family trees, all just wanted the same thing at the end of the day: a warm cup, a quiet room, and dreams that didn't involve conspiracies or court drama. So you drink. Slowly, letting the taste linger. It's nothing spectacular. But maybe that's the point. Spectacular doesn't put you to sleep. Quiet does. You meander now through a narrow corridor lined with cracked tiles and slightly scorched scrolls, a space tucked behind the royal kitchen, avoided by most, but loved by a select few, the Bureau of Brew Fails. That's not its official name, of course. Officially, it was the auxiliary chamber for alternative infusion practices. But you'll find no lavender mist or harpists here. This was the domain of what we might politely call the sleep brew disasters. Tonight you're invited into the less glamorous but far more relatable chapter of tea history, How Not to Brew a Nightcap. The room smells complicated, somewhere between old licorice burnt dates and that time someone tried to toast pine needles on a sandalwood fire, which incidentally actually happened. A junior herbalist, let's call him Confident Chen, decided that steeping pine needles in pear juice over sandalwood embers would bring clarity to cloudy minds. What it brought was a sooty explosion and a very irritable emperor who spent 3 days smelling like a holiday ornament. But back to the bureau. This chamber was established during the early Ming dynasty as a kind of tea experiment lab. Think test kitchen meets dream oracle. The emperor, having grown bored of standard infusions, issued a decree encouraging innovation. Unfortunately, no one clarified where the line between creative and culinary misdemeanor was. Thus began an era of extraordinary failure. You leaf through one surviving record labeled Experimental Infusion Series 1937, ingredients powdered deerhorn, fermented plum skin, a dash of camphor oil, and warm rice water. Intended effect, lucid dreams and better memory. Actual result, mild hallucinations, hiccups, and a dramatic pillow fight in the emperor's quarters. Historians still argue whether the blend was meant as a joke or just a well-intentioned mistake. One eunuch reportedly snuck in a pinch of cinnamon to improve the flavor, only to be accused of tampering with destiny. He was reassigned to wax the bamboo screens by hand. Other infamous experiments included Sleep Thunder tea, black tea, infused with chili flakes and licorice, described in court notes as shockingly alerting. Night dew nectar, lotus root boiled in goat's milk and sweetened with molasses. Outcome heavy dreams involving swamp creatures and awkward family dinners. Silent jade elixir, mint cucumber peels, and crushed pearl. Very pretty. Tasted like a wet shoebox. You sit now at a wooden testing table imagining what it must have been like to watch nervous attendants serve these creations to the emperor. Picture it, silence in the chamber. The emperor's eyebrow arching ever so slightly after one sip, a full 20 seconds of unbearable pause, and then either a satisfied sigh or the dreaded phrase, interesting. That word in imperial parlance meant this better not reach my digestive system again. Some emperors took these failures with humor. One left a comment beside an undrinkable blend reminds me of tax season. Another simply drew a sketch of a man falling asleep on the toilet. The scroll is preserved in the Forbidden City archives under unspecified commentary. But even in failure, there was learning. Some brews were too sour, too sticky, too exciting for the sleep chamber, but perfect for digestion or celebration. Others were modified, diluted, or paired with snacks to tone them down. One failed infusion of jujube fennel and barley was eventually rebranded as afternoon tea for relatives you don't like. And then, of course, there were the imposters. Tea merchants across the empire, hearing of the emperor's nightly habits, began advertising their blends as imperial sleep elixirs. One bold seller claimed his tea was brewed under the same stars as the emperor's dreams. Unfortunately, he was located 800 miles south of the palace in a region that hadn't seen stars for weeks. He was fined for celestial fraud. The emperor eventually appointed a royal tea examiner to verify any new blends before they reached his quarters. This job came with excellent pay prestige and the unfortunate requirement of drinking every single experimental tea first. The position was officially called Prefect of Infusional Integrity. Unofficially, Sleepless Chen. You're handed a cup now, fictionally, of course, of one such forgotten blend. It smells like aged almonds and cautious optimism. You take a sip. It's not bad. A little odd. Like someone tried to make dessert from leftover soup. But it's warm, and it doesn't fight you. You've had worse. That's the thing about tea. Even when it fails, it teaches. About balance, about restraint, about how not everything calming has to be complicated or powdered with pearl and deer horn. Sometimes a bad brew leads you closer to the good one. So you lean back thinking of all those palace workers tired, hopeful, half asleep, trying to bottle dreams in porcelain cups. Some failed, spectacularly. But they tried. And maybe their missteps made your own dreams tonight a little more delicious. You walk now into the heart of the city, not through the grand halls of the palace, but along stone paths, worn smooth by thousands of slippers, sandals, and gossip-laced whispers. This is not a place of scrolls or emperors. This is the tea house district, where sleep came not from ritual, but from stories. Welcome to the back alley world of pillow whispers and tea house gossip. It's late, just after moonrise. You pass through wooden doors held open by habit more than hinges into a tea house that smells of roasted rice, wood smoke, and secrets. The room is filled with soft murmurs, lazy fans turning above, and the occasional thump of someone nodding off mid-conversation. A host glides over, pouring something warm and mildly suspicious into a chipped porcelain cup. This is where the stories of emperors' sleep habits were truly shaped, not in official records, but over cups of tea and convenient exaggeration. The tale tonight. That Emperor Gaozong once forbade anyone in the palace from brewing tea after sundown, unless the moon was visible. Why, because he believed tea made under cloudy skies led to cloudy dreams. Historians still argue whether this was actual policy or just an overconfident bard improvising for tips. You take a seat near a low table where a sleepy old man is muttering to no one in particular. The Dowager Empress. Only drank teas made with rainwater collected from tiger lilies. Claimed it gave her dreams of floating above the clouds, throwing dumplings at her rivals. The younger listeners nod solemnly, the line between fact and fiction thoroughly dissolved in oolong. Then there's the rumor of the ghost cat, a palace feline, who supposedly haunted the emperor's sleeping quarters and only appeared if the tea was improperly brewed. If the leaves floated too high, ghost cat. If the lid was placed upside down, ghost cat. If anyone other than the emperor touched the cup fur shadows and a royal yowl. One empress reportedly banned all black cats from the palace for an entire year just in case. Of course, no tea-house evening is complete without at least one herbal expert weighing in. A woman in a green scarf leans forward and declares, if you add a single goji berry to the emperor's sleep tea, he'll dream of the color red for 3 nights. Proven. Someone asks her how she knows. She waves her sleeve and says, "My cousin's husband's pigeon was a palace courier." Case closed. Beyond gossip, these tea houses served another role dream interpretation. After sipping their blends, often stronger than any royal concoction, the regulars would describe their dreams in detail. Then the house dreamer, an elderly woman with cloud-shaped earrings and a tendency to speak in rhyme, would offer her reading. You dreamed of floating dumplings. You hunger for peace. A river made of teacups. You thirst for balance. The emperor turned into a cabbage. You need to stop eating so late. It's all very serious. And not serious at all. But that's the beauty of the place. In here, dreams matter because they're shared, whispered, retold with a twist. Maybe it was a jade teacup. Maybe a frog sang you a lullaby. Maybe that frog had a royal seal on its back. The longer the story brews, the stronger it becomes. You look around. Every table is its own universe of sleepy mythology. There's a couple silently sipping, clearly mid-feud, but soothed into silence by the steam. There's a group of traveling musicians, each trying to outdo the other's dream tale. One swears he dreamed of writing the imperial anthem despite never learning to read music. Another says she dreamed of marrying a phoenix. Her tea is laced with clove and defiance. And then there's you, sitting with your cup, listening, sinking into the sound of soft clinks and murmured tales. You begin to feel the line blur between your thoughts and theirs. Did you also dream of floating through the palace on a leaf? Did a turtle offer you advice about tax reform? Was that your dream? Or someone else's? That's the magic of tea houses. They mix stories the way they mix herbs, gently with purpose and just a touch of mischief. As you finish your cup, a small child dozing on a bench stirs and mutters, "The emperor's dream was loud tonight." No one reacts. Just another whisper for the steam to carry into the rafters. Outside, the night air is cooler. You hear the faint call of a flute in the distance. The tea house behind you fades into the darkness, but its warmth lingers like the taste of ginger on your tongue. In a world filled with rules and scrolls, the tea houses kept dreams alive the old-fashioned way, with laughter, with stories, with a cup held close, and a promise to remember or to forget. You step softly now across an invisible boundary, the one between storytelling and power. The tea houses behind you fade, and in their place rises a starker, more polished space, the imperial council chambers. No silk cushions here, no chipped cups or rhyming dream readers. This is where tea wasn't about sleep at all, until it was. Welcome to the era when sleepy time tea got political. It began innocently enough. An emperor couldn't sleep. Ministers began to worry. He was forgetful in meetings, misplacing edicts, even mistaking his royal seal for a cookie one unfortunate afternoon. His doctor recommended a calming blend. Nothing strong, just some magnolia bark, lily bulb, and plum blossom. The emperor slept for 12 hours. Everyone cheered. But then the pattern repeated. The emperor continued drinking the tea and continued sleeping through morning briefings. Petitions piled up. Foreign diplomats left with fruit baskets and no answers. At one point, the Minister of Agriculture reportedly made 3 separate land redistribution proposals, all approved, but all completely different. When someone pointed this out, the emperor simply yawned and said, "Let the crops figure it out." Soon, murmurs spread. The tea was too strong, or possibly enchanted, or worse, deliberately manipulated. One court scribe penned an anonymous scroll titled "The Empire Asleep," suggesting that too much of the emperor's inner circle had begun partaking in his nighttime tea. Productivity plummeted. One official caught snoring in the archives blamed it on floral residue from the emperor's cup. Another claimed he was simply meditating horizontally. You now find yourself in the Tea Purity Council, a short-lived bureaucratic invention established solely to regulate sleepy time blends. They convened weekly to analyze tea leaf origins, steep times, and incense interference. Their biggest scandal. Discovering that the emperor's favorite blend had been altered by a junior courtier trying to curry favor. The addition, a few crushed poppy seeds. Just enough to make dreams linger. The punishment, public apology. A formal slap on the wrist with a fan, so it was mostly symbolic. And most cruelly removal of tea privileges for a full moon cycle. He was last seen sipping boiled barley water and muttering about injustice. Of course, the question became if sleepy tea could pacify a monarch. Could it also pacify dissent? One famously tense court meeting ended abruptly when the Minister of War fell asleep mid-sentence. His cup, later found to contain a blend titled Gentle Fog, was traced to the Empress's personal stash. She denied everything. Historians still argue whether it was sabotage or self-care. Things escalated when the Prime Minister proposed a law restricting the use of strong sedative infusions among mid-level officials. His reasoning: too many scrolls, not enough action. The backlash was swift. Protests erupted not in the streets but in palace libraries where scholars fell asleep en masse in what became known as the Great Nap-In of year 482. To restore balance, the emperor created a rotating tea schedule. Mondays were for alert blends, mint green tea, roasted rice. Thursdays were for mild calming infusions. And Friday's tea was banned outright. This lasted 3 weeks before an assistant fainted from withdrawal. Tea was reinstated under the condition that it be consumed responsibly and with awareness of downstream administrative impact. It wasn't all chaos. Some used sleepy time tea for diplomatic advantage. During a tense negotiation with Mongol envoys, a clever court interpreter served a mild sleep blend known as Velvet Lantern. The resulting treaty was signed at midnight after all parties admitted they just wanted to go to bed. It was reportedly the most peaceful accord in a generation. Even outside the palace, tea-related conspiracy flourished. A traveling monk was once accused of herbal subversion after his bedtime blend became wildly popular with local governors who started canceling meetings in favor of spiritual naps. The monk, oblivious, just wanted people to stop worrying and digest better. You imagine yourself now in one of those meetings. The room is hot. Scrolls are stacked to the rafters. The emperor leans forward, squints at a tax proposal and says, "Bring tea." Someone hesitates. Your waking blend, Majesty, or the other one. He pauses, smiles faintly. Surprise me. Some scholars believe this moment marked the soft beginning of the era of slow governance, a period where fewer wars were declared, edicts became more poetic, and dreams were considered valid sources of policy inspiration. One edict even began with the phrase, "as seen last night in a river made of ink." Not everyone approved. Critics called it indulgent. One philosopher famously wrote, "A kingdom cannot be steered on steeped thoughts alone, but the people they liked it. Fewer soldiers marching, more poetry contests, and fewer nighttime executions which always disturbed the palace cats." You walk now past a display of teacups used by ministers over the centuries. Some are simple, others absurdly ornate. One has a handle shaped like a sleeping dragon. Another is wrapped in silk to prevent startling the beverage. Each cup holds a story, not of laws passed or borders drawn, but of men and women who for a brief moment put down the sword of statecraft and picked up something warm and quiet. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do with power is go to bed early Now the halls narrow again, not out of grandeur, but out of reverence. You've wandered far from the bustle of council chambers and deep into the wing where rituals spoke louder than laws. The stone beneath your feet cools. The light dims. And in the hush of flickering lanterns you enter a place more sacred than the throne room itself, the Emperor's nightly tea ritual chamber, where sleepwalkers' scrolls and steeping ceremonies became their own form of governance. Here, silence wasn't merely etiquette, it was law. Attendants were trained to move without sound, and robes were selected less for beauty than for the softness of their weave. Even the doors were padded in wool to muffle the creak of hinges. If you coughed in this room, you might end up assigned to broom duty in the outdoor koi ponds for a full lunar cycle. The Emperor's routine began not with tea, but with breath. Each night after the last official had bowed out and the palace had settled into its muffled exhale, the Emperor entered this space alone or accompanied by a trusted dream scribe. First came 5 breaths, deep, slow, timed to the beat of a bamboo water clock. Then came 5 temperature checks, 1 for the cup, 1 for the kettle, 1 for the air, 1 for the floor, and 1 just to be sure for the Emperor's own hands. Cold fingers made for restless minds, or so the manuals warned. Only after these steps would the tea leaves be measured, by weight, never by eye. A proper night's sleep could not be left to estimation. The blend often included Swanzao Ren jujube seed, Baiziren arborvitae kernel, and Fushina root fungus that looked unsettling but was believed to calm the spirit. Scholars still debate whether this was herbal science or a royal case of placebo. Next came the ritual yawn. Yes, a genuine, deliberate yawn, not faked, but summoned through gentle massage of the jawline and downward eye glances. This, the court claimed, encouraged the body to accept sleep's invitation. A dream scribe stood nearby, recording everything with a brush so delicate it could capture even the nuance of a raised brow. You might think all this excessive. And you'd be correct. But this was not just about sleep, it was a performance of control. If a dynasty's power flowed from the heavens, then surely dreams, where heaven whispered, were part of the state's communication network. The Emperor's sleep had cosmic consequences. There's a preserved scroll here on the shelf, its corners curled, its ink faded, recording one such night. It reads, "Evening blend chrysanthemum lily dried lotus stem, moon at 3/4, yawn achieved after 3rd breath. Dream recorded a crane flies westward. Interpretation pending." That last part, interpretation pending, wasn't just a placeholder. It could take days, sometimes weeks, for the court diviners to decide what a crane flying west actually meant. Was it a signal to expand trade routes, a warning about unrest, or just the subconscious reminding the Emperor that he missed birds? One Emperor Qianlong, famed for his poetry and peculiar taste in pillows, took things even further. He had his steeping rituals painted, turning his tea sessions into silk scrolls, depicting each gesture, each leaf, drop each waft of steam. He insisted on brewing at the exact temperature of autumn air at dawn. He also composed poems mid-steep, many of which make very little sense unless you too have been sleep-deprived for days. Here's a favorite. "Tea spins like stars in cup. I sip. The world forgets its borders. Also, I'm hungry." He wasn't alone in using the tea ritual as creative launchpad. Some emperors used the pre-sleep silence to draft laws. Others dictated their dreams aloud, letting the steam inspire metaphors and moonlit revisions to civil codes. One sleepy monarch accidentally legalized free bread for all ducks within palace walls. That law, never repealed, became a running joke in imperial kitchens for generations. And then there were the sleepwalkers. Yes, a handful of emperors, perhaps influenced by overly potent tea blends, were known to wander mid-dream. Not frantically, but serenely, like ghosts in slippers. Guards were instructed not to wake them, only to follow silently, recording everything said. One emperor was overheard murmuring, "Let the river write the tax code," and the next day, a new policy on waterway levies was issued. Coincidence? Historians still debate it. There's even a tale of an empress who staged her own sleepwalking, carefully planning routes that led past certain ministers' quarters, where she would accidentally say, "He seems trustworthy." The next day, promotions followed. Tea politics dream division. You walk now past a final scroll anonymously written unsigned. It simply says, "A cup of quiet, steeped at dusk, tells more truth than the loudest counsel." And that's what you feel in this chamber. A hush that goes beyond silence. A reverence for the idea that maybe, just maybe, what we dream while no one is looking shapes the waking world in ways we'll never fully understand. So you sip, slowly. Let the scrolls rest. Let the yawn rise. And step into your own dreams with ceremony, however small. The air thickens now, not with incense, but with the scent of something wilder, earthier. Moss magnolia, the faint memory of rain. You step through a shaded archway and descend a staircase carved not from stone, but from old cedar, its wood smoothed by generations of soft-soled shoes. At the bottom is not another chamber, not another hall of scrolls and rituals. You've arrived instead in something almost mythical, the secret garden of slumber. Few knew of its existence. Even fewer were permitted to enter. This was the emperor's hidden refuge, built not for show, not for ceremony, but for true deep rest. Concealed beneath the western wing of the palace, this underground retreat was said to be cultivated from plants that only grew under moonlight in soil, gathered from 5 sacred mountains, watered by spring mist, collected on silver combs. That last detail may be an exaggeration, but when it comes to emperor bedtime legends, it's best to let logic nap for a while. The garden's design was intentional winding paths, low lanterns, carefully placed pools, where koi moved like slow commas in a sentence meant to lull you. There were no straight lines, no harsh colors. Everything curved, gently turned softly. Even the wind, they said, slowed down here. At the center, surrounded by medicinal herbs and slow-dripping willows, stood a tea pavilion, round open air roofed with glazed tiles in soft gray blue. It was here the emperor would come wrapped in thick robes, escorted by no one to prepare his final cup of the day. Not brewed by servants, not composed by court herbalists. This was his tea. A secret recipe passed from ruler to ruler, sometimes tweaked, sometimes forgotten, always rediscovered. It included familiar ingredients, jujube seed, magnolia bark, but also garden exclusives, a rare violet known as silent bloom, and a vine leaf that, when crushed, released a scent said to calm even the most restless ghosts. One emperor planted that vine himself barefoot under the eclipse of a red moon. Another emperor, less poetic, simply renamed it that soothing leaf and moved on. The brewing ritual was stripped down. No poetry, no chanting, just steam rising into cool air and silence so deep you could hear a leaf settle on a pond. Some emperors sat for hours not drinking but simply watching. Watching the tea cool, watching the koi drift. One scroll records a moment when the emperor was asked what wisdom he had found in the garden. His answer, none. And that is why I return. This secret place became, over time, a sanctuary, not just for sleep, but for forgetting the noise of rule. No ministers, no proposals, no astrologers predicting famine if the emperor's dreams involved ducks. Here he could breathe like a man. Here he could not be seen a luxury more potent than any herb. Historians speculate that the garden may have contributed to several unexpected policy pauses. One year, no taxes were adjusted, no generals promoted, no construction approved. The reason the emperor had spent 23 nights straight in the garden, drinking the same blend, watching the same patch of moonlight glide across the tea's surface. He reportedly emerged refreshed, smiling faintly, and said, "We worry too much. Let the walls hold themselves up for a while." You walk now through the garden paths, yourself imagined though they may be. The air here doesn't demand. It invites. Somewhere nearby, a gentle stream trickles through a bamboo shoot, its rhythm less like water and more like the slow breathing of the earth. You come across a wooden bench with cushions faded by time. On it lies an empty cup, still faintly warm. The scent, sweet grass, and something else. A memory, perhaps, of being 10 years old and falling asleep on someone's shoulder. You sit, you listen. A moth circles a lantern. The silence holds you like a robe too soft to fold. And here in this space of nothing urgent you feel what those emperors must have craved more than all the rituals, all the perfect steeping, the permission to drift. To stop holding the empire together in your fists, to let the night pour over you like tea into a bottomless cup. A scroll is nailed discreetly into the pavilion wall. The characters painted with sleepy brush strokes read, "The tea does not try to soothe you. It simply waits for you to slow down." And with that, you understand why no trumpets announced this place, why no poems were written about it. Because to name the peace too loudly would be to break it. So let's not name it. Let's just sit. Let the quiet sip you for a change. The path back from the garden is slow as it should be. You step quietly now through the final corridor of this long, sleepy journey, a hallway hung not with banners of conquest or portraits of stern ancestors, but with glass-fronted cabinets, each holding something small and plain, a single teacup. Some are chipped, some have faded glaze. A few are surprisingly ordinary. These are not the emperor's finest vessels. They're not jeweled or gold-lined. These are the cups he kept tucked away in his private study, his traveling box, his meditation room. They are the last remnants of the countless nights spent chasing something gentle. Something you now know as well as he did, the quiet power of a bedtime brew. And so we arrive at the final chapter, echoes in the empty teacup. You sit once again in a silent room, though now it's yours. Maybe not made of cedar or jade. Maybe your ceiling isn't painted with constellations. But you, like those emperors, have your own rituals. The way you turn off the light. The way you exhale before lying down. The way your pillow curves just right beneath the weight of a day finally let go. You reach for a cup not ancient, not mythical. Just warm. Maybe filled with chamomile or a homemade mix you like because it reminds you of someone. Maybe it's not even tea. Maybe it's just warm water and a quiet moment. That's enough. Because after all these scrolls, after all the powdered roots and delicate leaf spins, you realize what those emperors eventually did too. The ritual matters less than the stillness it creates. The taste fades. The herbs do their part. But the magic is the pause before sleep, the pause between thoughts, the pause where you let the world go on without you for a little while. And maybe that's what they were truly chasing night after night. Not just rest, not dreams of dragons or prophecies or floating dumplings, but the permission to stop, the joy of doing nothing, and the rarest power of all the ability to be unneeded for a few hours. You walk past the last cup on display. It's the simplest one. Clay hand-shaped a little uneven at the rim. A card beside it reads, "Used by the emperor during his final years. Preferred over all others." That's it. No fanfare, no mystical engraving. just the cup he reached for when he was finally ready to rest, not as a ruler, but as a human being. So tonight you join that lineage. You take your own final sip. You feel the warmth settle in your chest, your shoulders unburdened, your breath deeper. The tea is gone. The cup is empty. And yet somehow it's full of everything you needed. Let that be enough. Let the night pour in. Let your dreams carry what remains. And now as the steam fades from the last porcelain rim and the moon drifts higher behind soft clouds, we leave behind emperors and chambers and gardens lit by dreams. Let the scrolls roll themselves up. Let the leaves return to soil. You've wandered through centuries of bedtime rituals, stumbled through fragrant halls, listened to whispered legends of teacups and ghosts, and over-enthusiastic ministers with poor taste in herbs. You've stood beside monks and scribes, shared jokes with sleepy testers, and sat quietly in the deepest corners of sleep's waiting room. Now let all that fade. Let your own room surround you again, softer now. Let the pillows beneath you take on a little more weight. Let the breath in your chest slow, smooth lengthen like a ribbon stretching out across a still lake. There is no more story to tell tonight, no more dragons to chase, no more leaves to steep. Just you, just the quiet, just that gentle hum of the world being perfectly fine without you for now. Close your eyes if they haven't already. Rest your thoughts beside your cup. And know this, the tea has done its work. The cup has held its peace. And you are exactly where you're meant to be.